welcome to another instalment of our dive into fairy tales and folk tales. Today it will be a little bit different as I discovered that I was woefully ignorant of probably all of the fairy tales that are here in England. And to rectify this helped. So today we'll be discussing a little tale called Capo'rushes. And Capo'rushes is an English fairy tale published and collected by Joseph Jacobs in the year 1890. He was a notable collector and publisher of English folklore, and this one was thought to be discovered in the Suffolk area around the 1850s. He was inspired by the Brothers Grimm, but he wanted English children to have access to English fairy tales, whereas they were chiefly reading the French and German tales. And in his own words, what Perrault began, the Grimms completed. Now, in going through this tale, you'll notice different elements of the likes of the ever more popular Cinderella, made famous by Disney, of course, and Shakespeare's King Lear in its opening decision of wanting the daughters to be put on a test to show how much they love him. And pretty disturbingly, in most of the tales that have this trope as their beginning, the underlying tensions are made just a little bit darker by having the father figure want to pursue an incestuous relationship with his daughters, which is the main cause of them to flee the house. Now, our story opens with a rich gentleman, sometimes he's a king, sometimes he's just rich, who had 3 daughters who he loved very dearly, and he wanted to know if they loved him just as much as he loved them. So he asked them individually how much they loved him, and the eldest daughter replied that she loved him as much as she loved her own life. The middle daughter replied that she loved him better than the whole world itself. And the youngest daughter replied that she loved him as much as fresh meat loves salt. Well, at that one, the father was not very happy. In fact, he was quite angry at the last answer and said that his youngest daughter didn't love him at all, and she probably only wanted him for his money, and in his house she would stay no more. So he promptly kicked her out and slammed the door in her face, which just shows how much he actually loved her. Now, the youngest daughter had no choice but to leave, and she walked on and on until she came to a fen, which is a flat, low-lying, marshy ground type field thing. And there she gathered a lot of rushes which were along the bank, and she made them into a cloak, complete with a hood, so that she could cover herself from head to foot and nobody would see what fine clothes she was wearing and really see her face at all. And then she walked on and on until she found a great house. When she got to the house, she asked if they needed a maid, and they turned her down, but she pleaded that she had nowhere to go and she would wash all the pots, she would scrape all the saucepans, and she would not ask for payment. All she wanted was a roof over her head, and she would work for nothing. Of course they accepted, because, you're going to hire someone if you don't have to pay him. And she did all the dirty work, and because she gave no name and would not remove her cloak of rushes, they called her Capo'rushes. Now, one day it happened that there was going to be a great party in one of the other grand houses in the area, and the servants were all given the evening off to go and look at all the grand people. Not to partake, but they could go watch them arrive. Kind of like a red carpet thing, I'm assuming. Capo'rushes said that she was far too tired to go, and she would be going to bed early, and the maids could go without her. She didn't mind. And as soon as all the servants had vacated the house, she threw off her cloak of rushes and cleaned up her fine clothes that presumably she'd been wearing since she left, and she went to the dance, and none of the ladies present were dressed as finely as she was. Now, she didn't just go to the party, dance the night away, and leave. Oh, no. This is a fairy tale. Of course, that just doesn't happen. You can't just go out for a night, come back, and all you have left over is a nasty hangover and an empty pizza box. It just so happened that the family that she worked for, their youngest son was at the dance as well. And he fell in love with her as soon as he saw her. As soon as their eyes met, he knew she was who he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. But before the party had ended, Capo'rushes had slipped away. Nobody knew where she'd gone. And when the other maids came back to the house, she faked being asleep. She had back on her cloak, and to them, that's where she had been all evening. Now, the next morning, the gossip was in full force. The other maids filled in capo'rushes on what had happened the night before, and that she missed seeing the most beautiful lady ever in the most fabulous dress they'd ever seen, and that the young master of the household could not have taken his eyes off her, and he really didn't dance with anyone else. There was going to be another party that night, and they couldn't wait to see how this developed. Now, when evening came again, Capo'rushes told the maids that, again, she was far too tired to go to a party, and she would go to bed early, as the previous night, and they were not to wait up for her or anything. She was not going to go. So they went on without her, and again, as soon as they'd gone, she threw off her cloak and she went to the party in the same dress as the night before. I'm assuming she didn't have a closet full of fine dresses, because that would be a bit suspect. Now, as before, she went to the party and the young master was stood waiting for her to arrive. He had no eyes for anyone else and refused to dance with anyone else but her. She was all he wanted. But again, before the dance was over, she managed to slip away and head home, before anyone else, before any of the maids or anything. And she again donned her cloak of rushes and faked being asleep when the maids get back. In the morning, the maids again filled her in on the latest gossip, and that the lady had been there again, and the young master had refused to dance with anyone else but this lady that nobody knew, and that there would be yet another dance that evening. Again, Capo'rushes said that she was far too tired to go, and they were to go without her. Now, at this time, the maids tried cajoling, they tried persuading, they tried everything they could think of to have her go with them, because they didn't want her to miss out on this wonderful sight for all these rich people that she could possibly never be. But she was determined that she would stay home. Kind of. So as soon as they were gone, she yet again threw off her cloak of rushes and aired out her fine clothes that up to now she's probably been wearing about at least 4 days straight, and sleeping in nonetheless. She cleaned herself up and she went to the dance because the girls got a party. And the young master could not take his eyes off her for 1 second, and he danced with none other. He kept asking who she was, what her name was, where she came from, but she refused to tell him. And just so you know, that would be one big red flag if somebody will not tell you their name and will not tell you where they came from. That's probably because they're gonna lie to you and break your heart, which is mean. In the end, he decided to give her a ring and told her that if he didn't see her again, he would die. Not to be dramatic in the slightest. But again, before the dance was over, she managed to lose him and slip away. She donned her cloak and faked sleep when the maids came back. Of course, the next morning they were full of gossip of this unknown lady that had captured their master's young son's heart, and still nobody knew who she was, what her name was, where she came from, or even where she went. But they said that they felt sorry for capo'rushes having missed all 3 dances, because that was the party season at an end, presumably, and there would not be another one. But she said she didn't really care. Now, while all this was going on below stairs, upstairs, the youngest son, you never get to know his name either, in fact, you never get to know any of their names. Anyway, the youngest son tried every way he could think of to find where the lady he had met at the 3 nights had gone. But go where he might, ask all he met, he did not hear anything about her. She seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth, and he felt worse and worse for love of her, and in the end took to his bed. Not being dramatic at all. The master of the house instructed the cook to make some gruel for the young master, as he was dying for love of the lady that he could not find. Because when you're heartbroken in bed, all you want is a bowl of watery, oaty broth that looks reasonably disgusting. And to be honest, if I wasn't ill before, after having that, I think I would be. I think it's up there with eating tripe. Now, when the cook came down to the kitchen and started making this, capo'rushes asked if she could make it instead, and, the cook could just have a day off. Now, the cook at first refused because it was her job after all, and she'd been cooking for this family for ages. But capo'rushes eventually persuaded her that she could make the gruel. It was, no skin off her nose, and the cook could get on with making all the other food for the family for the day. And when she'd finished making it, she secretly slipped the ring that the young son had given her into the gruel, and it sank to the bottom of the bowl. And she handed it over to the cook for the cook to take upstairs. The young man drank the dish extremely fast. Heartbreak hadn't taken away his appetite, it seems. And when he was finished, he saw the ring sat at the bottom of the bowl, presumably covered in oats and crap. He shouted for someone to send the cook to him immediately, without fail, and he demanded to know who made this gruel. Now, the cook was beyond frightened that she'd been summoned to the young son's bedroom, and he was demanding to know who had made this that he'd just eaten. So she was beyond frightened at him staring at her so intently, and she lied and said that she was the one who had made the gruel, which of course he knew that she hadn't, and that she really must tell him who made it, and she wouldn't be harmed for telling the truth, which... why a servant would think that anyway in a house full of nice people is a bit suspect, to be honest. And so she folded. She told him that capo'rushes had made the gruel, and she was immediately sent for and summoned to the room with everybody else. When she came, her face was hidden by the cloak of rushes that she always wore, and the young man asked her if she had made the gruel, and she replied that she had. He asked her where she got the ring from, and she replied, "From him as gave it to me." At that, he asked her who she was, and she said that she would now show him and everyone. And she threw off the cloak of rushes, and she was stood there in all her finery that she had been wearing for at least 4 days straight at this point. At least. Probably more, but it must have ponged a bit by this time, especially if you spent most of the night dancing. Now, the young master, he got very well very quickly at the sight of her. I bet he did. And they were to be married in a very short time, as he could not bear to be without her. and it was to be a very grand wedding, showing off how rich the family was and how happy they were to have this beautiful woman marry their young son, that they still didn't know where she came from. And everyone who was anyone in the vicinity was invited, including capo'rushes' father, who had kicked her out at the beginning of this tale. But she still refused to tell anybody who she was. I'm assuming she told them her name, but it doesn't say that. Now, before the wedding, she went to the cook and she made a very strange request. She asked her to make every dish for the whole wedding without a grain of salt. Now, at this, the cook protested because this was going to be a very large event in the social calendar, and her culinary skills were on show for everybody. But capo'rushes insisted, and she said that regardless of how bad it would taste, it really didn't matter. She was out to prove a point, and the cook had to do as she was instructed. Well, the wedding day dawned, and they were married in a beautiful ceremony. After, everyone sat down to eat all the delicious food that was on the tables, but the food was so bland and tasteless that none could eat it. And when capo'rushes' father tried first one dish and then another, he burst into tears. The men are very dramatic in this tale. The young master asked him what was wrong, because of course he wouldn't know if all your wedding guests are hating the food and one of them actually burst into tears because they ate it. I don't think he's very bright, to be honest. In between tears, the man told him that he had had a daughter, and when he had asked her how much she loved him, and she had replied as much as fresh meat loves salt, he had been angry and threw her from his house, and because he thought that she didn't love him. But tasting this food had made him realise that she probably loved him most of all his daughters, and now she was lost to him, and she was probably dead for all he knew. I mean, she could have been robbed, she could have been killed, she could have been working in a kitchen scraping saucepans. He just didn't know. Capo'rushes stood up at hearing this, and she put her arms around him, saying, "No, father, for here I am." And he finally recognised her, even though she hadn't been disguised all through the wedding, and of course being the bride, all eyes would have been on her. Says a lot for if he actually loved her in the first place. But at this, there was a joyous cry, and he recognised his daughter, and everybody embraced, and they all lived happily ever after. And that is our tale for today. It's a new one, and I'm quite excited for more of the English ones coming up. But if you like this video, please leave a like, comment and subscribe down below, and as always, keep reading.